without any further ado, let's get into the actual webinar and get going with this. So I think before we start talking about speed in general, it's good to kind of cover off some of the basic stuff, the basic needs for an ultra runner. And I think we can all agree that the most basic need for an ultra runner is to have a good cardiovascular engine. There's very little point in being able to run really fast 400-meter efforts if you can't run for the duration of your ultra, your 30, 40, 50, 100 mile or whatever it be, so it's very important to build that cardiovascular engine and also to sort of develop the musculoskeletal system behind that, so that can be the sort of muscles, the tendons, ligaments, bones, that kind of stuff. They're important parts of your training. And I always say to people that, if you are a timed pressed athlete, so maybe your training budget isn't overly big. Now, when I'm talking about training budget, I'm not talking financial, I'm talking time. So the time you have to invest into your training, if it isn't huge, then I would always say to people, look, the most important focus for you needs to make sure that you've got a good cardiovascular system and that you've got a strong kind of body, good musculoskeletal system that will support you through that kind of journey. And then, of course, when we get into separate things outside of that, we talk about course-specific training. So, again, this is pretty obvious stuff, but I think it's always good just to reiterate that again in the webinars. And here we're talking about, so if for argument's sake, I'm going to be racing a hilly trail run, but I live in the flatlands of East Yorkshire and I've got no hills to come round. If all my training's been on the flat tarmac of East Yorkshire and I suddenly go into a trail, I'm going to find it a bit of a challenge. So we need to have some course-specific training as part of your component if you can as well. And I sort of think that's quite important even before developing the speed to some extent, because I think we do need to have that if you've got a challenging course. If it's very hilly, you've got lots of climbs, lots of descents, you need to get some of that into your training. Proprioception is quite important, particularly for the more technically challenging courses. Now, if you're running a relatively flat ultra marathon on tarmac, or you're running it on some good sort of canal path or something like that, well, that's probably not so important. But if it's a very technical course, you're going to need that ability to feel the ground and quickly react to whatever's underfoot at any given moment. So they're kind of two important areas as well that I think probably, in my mind, come before developing the speed. Because I think if we don't have that cardiovascular engine, you don't have that musculoskeletal strength, and you've not got the course-specific training, the proprioception, then it's very little point in, you're still going to have a very challenging day, even if you can go quite fast. However, speed is important. So, again, I put 4 simple bullet points there in relation to the benefits of speed, and I think it's pretty obvious, really. I think we all kind of know this, and this goes across all distances, really. It improves your lactate threshold. So by having some very targeted speed sessions here, we can improve our lactate threshold and our ability to synthesize lactate as an energy source and lactate buffer better. So that means that our lactate threshold kind of starts here at the start of the training cycle, and our aerobic base is here. As our lactate threshold improves, as does our aerobic base automatically, so that kind of follows up with us. So suddenly when we find ourselves, our efforts for race pace was, say, for argument's 9-minute miles, by us having an improved lactate threshold and lactate buffer, we've improved our aerobic pace, so hopefully we should be able to go a little bit faster for the same effort. Slightly controversial bullet point in that improving your dynamic flexibility doesn't specifically do that. And here what I'm talking about is often, particularly in ultra running, we tend to have quite a narrow gait because we're running lots and lots of steady, slow miles. So we don't really stride out too much. And by having a bit of speed work in there, for those runners that maybe don't stride long, this will in some cases improve their stride length, so you'll get a degree of dynamic flexibility brought into that. But that is really up for debate, to be fair. I think the variety to your training is quite an important one for a lot of runners. Your bread and butter sessions for ultra running are going to be pretty steady away, long efforts. They're not going to be those kind of things that are going to set your social media on fire. Or if you post on Strava your pace on that Strava segment, if you're doing an ultra run, well, it's not going to be that fast. But by throwing in a bit of speed work, I think it does add that bit of variety into your training. So it kind of freshens up the mind as well. So you get rather than just having a constant sort of like, here we go, we're doing that same old kind of training week after week after week, by throwing in a bit of speed work that adds a little bit of variety into it, so kind of freshens you up mentally. I think that's something that we often underestimate the benefit of in your training, and particularly if somebody is, struggles with those doing those long steady runs, this is something for them to look forward to in that week. Again, we'll talk lots of carrots around that in a minute as well. Of course, like everything, there's risks to this as well, so there are benefits of actually running speed, but of course the risks are that it's an increased injury risk, and we need to factor in recovery. So let's talk about the increased injury risk. So if your athlete, or yourself, if it's you you're talking about, hasn't done a lot of speed, or has been maybe out injured for a while, or has come back, has never done speed for years, he or she is going to find it quite challenging. And if you just throw them into some hard speed sessions, they're going to be taking a lot more forces through themselves, and they're probably not going to be quite ready for that. So you've got to really be very mindful when you bring that speed into there to gradually increase the intensity of it and the duration of those kind of speed things. Otherwise, you do increase the risk of injury. It's not guaranteed, of course. Some athletes can, you can go from no speed, throw speed at them, and they're fine. But I think for a majority of athletes, we're going to see an increased injury risk. Plus, if you add to that as well that they are doing lots of miles in their ultra training, so they are going to have lots of fatigued muscle fibers in their legs, and you throw in that speed in there as well, that can really complicate that risk scenario. Recovery is a big thing here. So for a lot of athletes, you're going to be doing lots of maybe back-to-back long weekend runs, maybe a midweek long run as well. So when you're throwing in some speed work as well, you've got to try to work out where you can fit that in your race calendar to ensure, or your training calendar, sorry, so you can ensure that they get sufficient recovery between those, because your average speed work session is going to take maybe 48 hours or so for that athlete to be fully recovered from that. So if you think about that during your week, if you've got say a midweek long run, that's probably going to take a good 24 hours or so to recover for, maybe a bit longer. Then you throw in a speed session, that's another 48 hours recovery, and then you've got your back-to-back weekends. Where does the athlete get the recovery? I think for those athletes that maybe don't have a great recovery profile, that struggle with that, what I tend to do with those is work on a slight focus on each week. So one week might be focused towards more speed, the following week might be more sort of endurance based. So first week you might have 1 or even 2 speed sessions in that week, but very little in the way of volume of endurance. The week after, you might say, okay, the focus is now going to be more endurance based, so we're going to go back to that midweek long run, we're going to go to one of those back-to-back hard challenging runs at the weekend. That way you can get the speed in one week and you can get the long runs in the week after, so they're not kind of conflicting with each other too much if that athlete struggles with recovery. Of course, the downside to that is that it's probably going to mean that sort of 14, 18, 20-week training cycle might be a little bit longer, because you're going to be factoring, this 1 week on speed, 1 week of endurance, 1 week of speed, 1 week of endurance. It's going to take longer to build up. But it's a way to manage that if the athlete hasn't got a great recovery profile. So I hope that kind of makes sense so far. I don't want to kind of over labor the point on this really. I thought we'll get into some of the sort of sample kind of sessions that I may do with athletes, and we'll talk about how we can vary them and how you can bring them in. So I think I always tend to start off with sort of threshold based kind of stuff, so that kind of tempo work I think for me works great for a majority of ultra runners, because we could argue that when you're ultra training that actually every run's a speed session, because typically a speed session is something that's done faster than race pace, and for most ultra runners every run is going to be faster than your race pace, so you could potentially say, well, actually we're doing speed every day anyway, but I think having this kind of specific stuff where we're targeting more the sort of lactate threshold, the threshold zones, and we're trying to get that sort of lactate buffering to improve and improve that lactate synthesis, I think these are the kind of sessions that we kind of start with. And the broken tempos for me are the perfect way to start, because it's when the athlete maybe they haven't done speed for a while, they're not maybe at their fittest right now. You can bring these ones in relatively straightforward. You can play a lot with how you might formulate these. So rather than starting with 5 sets, you might start with 4 sets. The 6 minute on, 1 minute off. For the start off, you might have 1 minute of full recovery. So the on pace is obviously your threshold pace, your tempo pace. You might have 1 minute of full recovery. If they're okay with that, you might say, okay, now we're going to go for a jog recovery. If they're even fitter, you might say, well, actually, now we're going to go for more of a sort of a higher end aerobic, but not quite threshold kind of session, where you're doing 6 minutes on at threshold and then one minute at sort of a high end aerobic. And you can change this quite a lot. We tend to start off primarily working towards time as opposed to distance. I think for most athletes, when they're first kind of starting this enables them to kind of feel the pace and the effort, as opposed to be worrying about the actual pace they're running at. So if you kind of say we're going at 6 minutes or 8 minutes or 5 minutes, they just feel the efforts more than worry about the pace so much. They get kind of used to that effort, and it helps quite a lot. And then as they get more specific, we can definitely start playing with the distances more. I think that, to me, I find is a better way. And then as we kind of progress through these, so the athletes and I have been doing these for a few weeks, and we're seeing some good solid efforts and not finding them too challenging, we might then sort of progress on to a bit more challenging kind of speed sessions, where we're now sort of progressing a little bit further. So we've taken those into longer duration and distance, and again we can play hugely with the sort of format of these, where we do maybe 3 to 4 sets of that first one. Again, we can play with the recovery, so full rest recovery, jog, faster pace recovery. The same when we do the 15 minutes efforts there. You can play there, and you can say, actually, I want the first one to be maybe at say half marathon pace. I want the second one to be a progressive one, so we're finishing a little bit faster than so maybe we start at threshold, and then the last 5 minutes of that 15-minute, I want it to be somewhere around about your 10k kind of pace, so you really bring that intensity up a little bit. That's going to provide a huge stimulus to that. And again, we get these sort of 2 times 3 to 4 miles, a similar kind of thing there. You can go through that and play with those paces inside that. And again, with those, you'd be looking for a decent sort of recovery between those 3 to 4 mile efforts. So you might go 2 times 3 miles with an 800 meter jog recovery, or you could just have a full 3 minute rest and then go back at it again. Those kind of stuff. The 3 minutes, 3 times 15 minutes ones. Again, we can play with those quite a lot. Again, it's one that I like to do with quite a lot, where we'll maybe start the first one at marathon pace, the second one just a little bit faster than marathon pace, and the third one faster still. So you're kind of building up the effort as they're getting more fatigued. And again, this really helps with those kind of sort of threshold building sort of workouts. Here now we're getting a little bit more complicated, and this is now a little bit more sort of, I'd guess you'd call that one more sort of power endurance, that first one. And it is quite a challenging session, that one. And again, on these ones now, we're talking the athletes have to be really, really ready for these. If you throw the average runner, they're going to struggle with these, so this is aimed more to those athletes that are really ready and fit and able to run for a long time, and have probably been doing speed for quite some time. It's not. I would definitely not want to start here with somebody who's not done speed. And again, this kind of 3k, 2k, 1k with 2 minutes between each rep and 4 minutes between each sets. Again, you can play with the format of those. So you could start at maybe half marathon pace, maybe go to sort of your typical kind of tempo pace in the middle there, sort of your 10 mile sort of race pace, and then finish off the last one a bit faster than that. Those kind of ways you can play with it. And again, with the 3 minute or the 4 times 3k with the jog between, similar sort of thing, you can play with that. The 7 miles ins and outs are a great one for me. I like those ones because they are quite a challenge to do. Here we're talking basically 7 sets of 1 mile in, 1 mile out. So it's like 7 miles. We're sort of talking like your first one is you're just above your threshold for your first one. So no, start just below your threshold. So your threshold's there. We're going to start just below, and then we're going to go just above, just below, just above, just below, all the way across. So then it's right. So it will average out. So the middle of it will be basically you'll have been working your threshold zone quite a lot during that, and that's quite a challenging workout. And of course, something like that again will need lots of recovery after a session like that, and it's certainly something I wouldn't throw at somebody. The last two I quite like, actually. I think these are great sessions to work for athletes. So the 1k is at sort of 10k effort. 3 mile at threshold, and that's that top one there should be 1k at the end there, not 1 mile. So 1k, 3 mile, 1k. These are great. So you start at 10k pace for your 1k, and then you go 3 miles at your threshold, and then you go 1k at your 10k again. So that last 10k would feel quite challenging, because at this stage, you know, you've already done sort of 3.5 miles of efforts, and you'll be feeling quite tired. There's no kind of recovery between the 1k and the threshold, so you go straight from there to threshold and back up again. It's going to be quite challenging, but that's going to be really good for that sort of lactate buffering, lactate synthesis. And of course, if they can cope with that, then you can go down to the 1 mile with 3 to 4 miles at threshold and 1 mile. There are some sort of sample kind of sessions that I would be looking at for a lot of the runners there. And then we kind of, I guess, get towards sort of more sort of longer kind of traditional stuff as well that can be worked quite well. And this will be sort of, and athletes that I coach may have seen some of these already. The sort of 4 times 3k moderate, 1k threshold. I'll often flip that round, actually, have 3k threshold and 1k easy. So again, you can play with paces on these. That one works really well. That's that moderate pace, so you're just below your threshold there, and then you got it threshold and just below threshold, that kind of stuff. So it works really well. And of course, you can flip it around, so you can go 3k threshold and 1k easy again, or 1k moderate if they're fitter. But again, you need to be quite fit if you're going to go 3k at threshold. And the progression run, it's a standard progression run. You can format that in any way you really want to. I think it's always good to maybe throw in a bit of hills in some of these efforts as well, particularly if we get back to some of the earlier efforts, you know, when we're talking with these kind of broken tempos, you know, an extra stimulus you can throw in there for a bit of extra strength training is you can say, you know, if we're finishing near a hill or a hillier environment, let's get that last minute or so going up that hill, working up that hill, you know, and then sort of jog down, recovery and start again. That can be a great way to throw in a bit of extra strength training into that as well. How that kind of makes sense. So we've kind of covered the basics of what I wanted to get through there. It's a bit of a whistle top thing there, and whistle stop tour there. And of course, this is going to be back on the UK athletics website to review the playback later on this week. So I'll pick up some of the Q&As right now as let's go into them. Let's start off with them. And if you've got any questions related to these, or how you might want to do speed sessions, why we might want to do speed sessions, some of the caveats and risks around them, you know, just throw them in now, and we'll take as many questions as we can. So let me just bring up the Q&A mode. So okay, so one from Martin here. Would you do the broken tempo sessions off-road if your ultra is on trails, or would you stick to the roads? That is a really, really great question. For me, personally, I'd probably look to do these where I've got better footing, for the primary reason that I'd want the quality of this. So I'd be looking to try and get good quality pace where we'd make the trail runs. Perhaps that might be part of your longer runs, where we do the trail kind of work, you know, to get used to that proprioception and running trails during your long runs. I'd tend to do the speed on a better quality surface. But as I said to, you know, you can bring a component of hill into there. But for me, I'd be looking to try and bring that into primarily onto good quality surfaces, so that way you can be sure that the athlete's not going to trip over a branch or a tree root somewhere as they're running as well, because the last thing you want to do is be at your 5th rep where they're getting a bit fatigued, they're not quite picking the foot up quick enough, and they're just clipping that tree root and falling over, and then you've got them maybe out injured for a week or two. So for me, I'd definitely look to use the roads where you've got a better you know, it can be a field, it can be grass, but maybe not the trails, but then do the course specific stuff during your longer runs perhaps. Okay, one for Gray. Okay, so when I refer to threshold, we're talking about aerobic, anaerobic, yes. So primarily I'm referring to more sort of high-end aerobic, low-end anaerobic. So a bit of the both really. So it's like getting that kind of level where you're kind of working that controlled discomfort. And for some people, you know, if you're less conditioned, you're going to feel that you're at that threshold zone when perhaps you're not. So for argument's sake, me, where I've really detrained over the last 6 months because I've been very heavily busy with work, if I was to go out and try to do a threshold session now, I'd probably find that actually I'd be towards my middle end aerobic where I'm feeling like I'm already in my threshold zone. But definitely I'm talking high end aerobic, low end anaerobic for that kind of stuff. And again, of course, as the duration goes longer, with the anaerobic stuff, you're going to find it harder to be anaerobic, so it's going to be higher end aerobic, I guess. Could you define proprioception for me, Graham? Yeah, so here I'm talking about that kind of feeling the ground, that ability to have to know where you're placing your foot, which part of your foot's reaching the ground, and that kind of stuff. Now, a lot of ways we'll develop that is through doing a lot of drills. And a lot of the drills that you might do, the A skips, B skips, all of this kind of stuff really helps with that feeling the ground. And that's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about proprioception in my use of that term. Now, people may have different uses for that, but for me, I'm talking about that feeling the ground, knowing my whole sort of body position, not just the ground as well, I suppose, knowing where my whole body is, but primarily having that ability to feel the ground. So as soon as I'm running, say, a trail or a uneven surface, I can feel straight away. As soon as my foot starts to slip, I can feel it straight away. I'm not kind of heavy and then reacting. I've got that real fine-tuned acuity there, so I can feel it straight away and react straight away to what the ground's giving me. I hope that kind of makes sense. Okay, so Erica, so how often would I suggest doing speed sessions? Now going back to the typical coach's answer, it depends, and it really does depend on what the athlete's wants and needs are. So if you're a new ultra runner and your primary goal is just to get some ultra running experience, for me, I wouldn't focus too much at all about doing the speed sessions. Maybe throw them in once in a while, every other week or every second, third, or even fourth week, just to freshen up your training, because you're probably not too bothered about your overall finishing time. You're more bothered about actually finishing. So a majority of your training is going to be based around getting that aerobic engine built there. However, if you're a more experienced ultra runner and you're looking to maybe go for a particular time, you're looking for maybe a podium place, or you're looking for a qualification time for another event, maybe something like a Western States or something like that, then of course we need to start thinking about building up that speed and improving that lactate threshold, lactate buffering, and lactate turning point. So for those kind of athletes, I'd be saying, well, ideally I'd look to get in maybe just one session a week. If again you've got a bad recovery profile, maybe one every 2 weeks, as we said before, where you might have 1 week to focus towards speed. In that week, you could potentially then do 2 speed sessions if you've got a poor recovery profile, and have less long duration volume stuff, so less aerobic building. And the following week, drop your speed entirely, and it's all aerobic based. That's how I would kind of do that. If you're kind of okay with 1 speed session and recovery, I wouldn't do 2 in a week with the long training of the ultras, particularly during your peak volumes, because you're going to tend to find that the recovery is going to be too much. So your average ultra runner might run, say, 2 or 3 hours on a Saturday, maybe 4 or 5 on a Sunday. If you're throwing in a couple of speed sessions during that week, that's going to overwhelm them too much. They're not going to recover, and they're just going to end up basically getting to race day overly fatigued and unable to perform. So I would say, the big caveat really, I guess, for the athletes is to listen to your body closely, because we all have a very different recovery profile. And also that might change from week to week. So if you've had a particularly hectic week and you've got some speed booked down that week, you might say, you know what, actually, I'm going to knock it back a week because I've had a really, really busy week. I look at my week last week where I had, I think, between 2 days, I think I'd worked in the realms of 26 hours and I had 3 hours sleep. So between those 2 days, I could not have possibly managed any kind of speed session between those 2 days, or even for a couple of days after that. So you've also got to listen to your own individual athlete's body and let that dictate you. But for me, I'd say no more than twice a week. But for the average person, to be fair, once a week. And maybe if you are looking to do it twice a week, I'd probably do a focus of 1 week being more speed focused and the following week being more endurance focused. Hope that kind of makes sense. Okay, sorry, thanks for that, Martin. Okay, Edward. Thoughts on frequency for speed sessions and recovery need for doing high mileage. Again, we've kind of covered that a little bit there again, but that's just to reiterate that for me, it's going to be very individual, as a lot of this is going to be for ultra running, because we all respond very differently, and our training in ultra running is going to be hugely different. So what's appropriate for a 50k is going to be entirely different for what's appropriate for a 215 mile multi-day event. So it's really, working out what works for you. But for me, our bodies tell us very, very clearly what we can and can't do. And if we find that actually I'm overly tired, overly cranky from bringing that session in, I need more recovery, like I said, for me, I would probably, if I was looking to put a block together where I want to really build that person's speed and get some really focus in there, 1 week would be speed focused, the following week would be more endurance focused, and I'd kind of alternate that way. So get 2 good quality speed stuff and some endurance sort of maintenance during that speed week, and the following week no speed work really, so I'll build in that kind of aerobic base. So one from Baitons. Your sessions you propose are all aerobic sessions. Would you ever use strides? I mean, I like strides, but I think it's a great way for working. It certainly improves the running form with strides. I think the anaerobic or the pure speed stuff, you know, when we get into pure speed, we're talking about less than 100-meter efforts. I think there's some advantages to that. I think though, for a lot of the longer endurance events, I think we really get more bang for the buck for going towards more the sort of high-end aerobic, low-end anaerobic kind of work, you know. And so if you throw certainly some hills into that, so if let me just go back to one of the slides 1 second. If we was to look at something like these ones here, and you could maybe look at these where you've got the 10 times 3 minutes on and 30 seconds, you know, you could look for maybe throwing in some kind of gradual hill climbs in that as well. So whilst you're going on that, that's really going to start, you know, pushing the heart rate up, and it's going to really start you producing some lactate. So you're going to get some good quality lactate work in that kind of session as well. So that would provide an extra level of stimulus. But for me, I think, you know, I'm not too fussed for the ultras for going for that pure speed, because I don't think that's what it's going to really benefit them ultimately in the long run. But of course, you know, that's just my personal opinion. Let's put on the next one. So one from Colin. What level of effort would a progression run start and finish at, and what would be the structure? So again, it depends, and it really does. It depends what you want to get out of it and what the athlete is able to do, and that's the key thing. It is really what the athlete is able to do is really going to define what you can do in that session. So early in that, like I said, you know, a progression run for an athlete quite early on in the season, where maybe they're not overly fit and able to hold those progressive paces for long, you might start something outside of marathon pace and a nice easy jog to start off with, and finish towards kind of more marathon or at best half marathon pace, and kind of up the effort. So you might start off with a 40-minute progression run and up the effort every 10 minutes, you know, start easy, then go to maybe more marathon pace, a little bit faster, and half marathon pace at the end. It really depends on where the athlete is and what they're able to cope with, and you can really play with those as well. And you can use extra, you know, you can use the course to actually provide you some additional stimulus as well. So if you get the athlete to run, say, a more hilly route, and you know that maybe mile 6 of their progression run is going to be quite a steep hill, you can say, okay, and that's going to be maybe towards the end, I want you to gradually build up towards your sort of half marathon pace, and I want you to be at half marathon pace or faster when you hit the bottom of that hill, and gradually increase that as you climb. So there's lots of ways you can play with that really, but a lot depends upon the athlete. But for me, you know, I tend to try and get them finishing somewhere between half marathon, if they're really fit, towards sort of 10-miler pace towards the end of the progression. But you build it up depending upon where they're at, and it also depends on the duration of it. I hope that kind of makes sense. One from Heath there. Would you encourage any sprint techniques? Yeah, I mean, I think it's hugely important to try, before you do some of your speed sessions, in my mind, certainly the early stuff, to actually include a sort of dynamic warm-up. Now in that dynamic warm-up, you're obviously going to bring in some drills, your A skips, your B skips, all of this kind of stuff that you're going to bring in that's going to help improve that kind of running technique. And hopefully sprint, I mean, as a coach myself, I took myself through a sprints and hurdles coach education program, because I wanted to understand biomechanics better, because I think it's something that's often missing in the endurance training stuff. So definitely I do believe there's a huge benefit for athletes doing speed training in relation to kind of sprint techniques. However, you know, I think what we need to understand is that this athlete, if they've got a relatively limited training budget, or they've got to consider the recovery profile, where are you, what are you going to reduce in your training to improve that, and what's going to be the benefit of that? You've got to kind of work it out for yourself. For me, I would be using the warm-up drills before the speed sessions to kind of get that technique in there. So work that technique through there to make sure you're building better proprioception, you're getting body alignments, you're getting the right angles that you need for your body, so you're able to get that sort of dynamic movements and flexibility as you spoke about there. I hope that kind of makes sense. So for me, I wouldn't go into specific sprint training per se. I'd go more into, I'd want them to be doing better quality sort of warm-ups before the speed sessions, and certainly those early ones where you're doing those early broken tempos. That's a great time when you can really work with the athlete, because you can say, all right, we're going to spend 10-15 minutes at the start of this doing a good quality session of drills, and you're going to work through those over that period of maybe 4 or 5, 6 weeks it takes them to improve that technique, and still continue that beyond that as well if possible. Okay, so one from Fee. A lot of my runners prefer using rate of perceived effort over set v.tap. Yeah, is there a downside to this? For me, I kind of go with your runners in that. I think the RPE is a great way for us to kind of, as runners, get used to. I think we can get very bogged down in the technical analysis data sometimes, and not let that really allow us to perform so well. So all I want for my athletes when I'm training them is to get to the relevant effort, so that they can get the relevant response that I want. Now, of course, paces will change depending upon individual days. What kind of day has that athlete had, or what kind of week has that athlete had? Have they had lots of broken sleep? Has their nutrition not been so great? Hydration not been so great? Is it warmer? Is it colder? Are they fatigued from work? All of these kind of things. So I think working towards RPE for me, I think is actually my preferred way to go in relation to actually working with the athletes. But again, I always say as well, it's whatever the athlete prefers is what you should be working with. I've got athletes who prefer the very technical data. I've got a majority of them prefer the RPE like yours do there, and that works really well for them. I've got some athletes that will only train in Ks, some that will only train in miles. So you work with whatever works for them, really, because we need to be quite of athlete centered around this kind of approach. So if one athlete's very sort of, I need the analytics, I need to know exactly what I'm working to in data terms, then you give them that range to work towards. If it's somebody who's a little bit more vague and says, what kind of effort do I want to work towards, then of course you give them that kind of feedback. I hope that kind of makes sense. Okay, the one for Graham here. Is there any benefit in getting athletes through something like a test if you have? Yeah, I mean, I guess there is. I think the big challenge around that though is for a majority of athletes. If you're more on the performance spectrum, so you are looking, you're generally what I'd call a true performance athlete in terms of, you're out there, you're looking to challenge at the podium, or you're looking for some qualification times in relation to a hard race like maybe like Western States or something like that, then for sure, go out and get into the labs and get those tests done to work out your sort of threshold stuff. I think for a majority of athletes though, I think it becomes a bit of an expensive waste of time, because they spend a lot of money getting that feedback from the lab, and then they maybe don't implement it correctly into their training. So it's understanding as well, once you get that feedback, how do you put that into your training? So if the athlete's not able to do that, then there's very little benefit of them having that, and it can be quite an expensive thing. I mean, in the past, what I've done with athletes is, if we can get a group of 5 or 6 together, I'll often contact a local university near where I live and say, okay, you've got a sports and science degree course there, we've got a group of athletes, how about we come to a deal to get it cheaper? And that can work sometimes. But I think for a majority of athletes, I really wouldn't bother too much hitting the lab. But definitely if you're on the performance spectrum and you're looking, maybe to look for a national, international vest, or you're a genuine podium contender, and are you looking to be a podium contender, then there could be a lot of benefit to be had about that, because of course you'll know accurately what those paces should be working at. Okay. So have we got any more questions? I guess is that, because we've got through the questions that we've got so far. whilst people are maybe thinking of a few things. So for me, like I said, the big thing about building speed into your ultra running program is I think there's a huge benefit to be had for that for a lot of athletes. But if you're quite new to ultra running, then I would say your focus needs to be first off building that aerobic base and getting used to ultra running. For those people that are more seasoned ultra runners, speed can really help take your performance to that next level. But again, you've got to really listen closely to the body and ensure that there's plenty of kind of recovery in that. So I'll just work through the last couple of slides that I've got on here. So little bit of recommended reading. I think I watched right from last time that I did a particular session. Some great resources there. I mean, some fantastic books. These are all found in my library at home. I particularly like Science of Running. That one I think is really great for helping you understand some of the basic sort of physiology stuff that's needed. And I think the performing under pressure is a great one as well, because that gives us lots of those psychological strategies that can help. Because ultimately, it doesn't matter how great your lactate threshold is, or your ability to run at a decent aerobic pace. If you crack under pressure, then you're never going to truly fulfill your overall full kind of capabilities and reach your full potential, I guess. So there's some really good reading on those. I definitely recommend those. And we are going to have some more webinars coming up. I haven't confirmed the dates yet because I'm having to speak with individual people, find where they're available, and then get those dates around there. But I've already pegged in Helen Davies for a sort of a Q&A session. I don't know if you saw the last one we did with Samantha Amend. We've got one with Helen Davies, who did I think she got silver at the IAU 50K last year and had a fantastic performance. For me, although Ali stole the limelight with getting the world record, I think Helen had for me, the best performance in the day, because that's probably the most like, wow, that surprised me performance. That was a brilliant one. And of course, the Q&A session with Robbie Britton, you all know Robbie, great athlete, and obviously Walter from back in the day, a very accomplished GB athlete, and obviously IAU committee member and experienced ultra runner guy. There are, as I said, more options available for the webinars, the ones you can see in the Athletics Hub. This one will be up there in a couple of days. I can see there's just a couple of little questions coming up here, so I'm just going to bring up one more. Let's just come up here. So again, for Graham, I heard you fit to A skips and B skips. Yeah, so these are specific drills. Difficult. I can't really demonstrate them right now because I'm in the middle of my home. If you hit YouTube, quickly type in A skips, B skips, you'll find some fantastic demonstrations, and I'm sure there are some on the England Athletics resources as well. But these are really good sort of exercises that help build that kind of proprioception, get the foot and the body in the right positions for running, and really part of that sort of dynamic warm up that we would be looking for. And yet, somebody, if you're there, strongly recommending that Science of Running, absolutely. So that's it for this webinar. Thank you for taking the time out this evening to attend. I know it's always challenging these days and ages. We've got so much going on now, and I know times have been very difficult for a lot of us in our ability to train and stuff like that. I will be probably towards the weekend or early next week putting on some more webinars, putting the dates to these ones I've got ahead in front of me, and also some other content in relation to ultra running stuff. If there is any particular subjects you'd like to be covered under ultra running, by all means, feel free to send an email over to me and say, hey Darren, can we cover more on this subject, please? I'm more than happy to talk about any subject that you folks out there want. You've got my email address at the end of here. It says dreevell, that's DREEVELL at englandathletics.org. By all means, feel free to reach out to me. Anything related to ultra running or running in general, and also any ideas of things that you may want in future webinars. But that's it for this one. I hope you found it informative and useful, and I look forward to to seeing you on future webinars. So once again, thanks a lot for your attendance. Take care, stay safe out there, and I hope to see you all on an ultra webinar in the future, and maybe even at some ultra races if we can finally get some on in the coming weeks ahead. So take care all there. Bye. Thank you.